We turn now to the case of a serial killer who evaded authorities for more than 3 decades. Well, that ended this week when Indiana State Police identified the man dubbed the I-65 killer.
Serial killers are creatures representing some of the deadliest yet most intriguing people on the planet, whose horrific acts often leave us wondering why. We hate them, we're terrified of them, but we are still curious to know about their story. Here is one such story of a serial killer. In today's video, we are shedding light on an untold story of the I-65 serial killer. Killers have always been an occasional menace to society, and they undoubtedly existed between the 1950s and 1990s. It was the period before our society made technological breakthroughs in forensic and DNA analysis, and many monsters escaped as a result. But in recent years, we have hit the golden age of forensic technology, which means that the cold cases that were stumped are getting solved and justice is finally beginning to be served. The I-65, or the Days Inn serial killer case, was among those recently solved Ohio cases. But unfortunately, this untold story of the I-65 serial killer is one of the most that Kentucky has ever seen. It was the late 1980s and early 1990s. Elizabethtown was the county seat of Hardin County, Kentucky, and it is still a tiny historical city. Elizabethtown was a community of barely 18,000 people in 1987, long before strip malls and commercial zoning degraded the city's old town vibe. Our first victim, 41-year-old Vicki Heath, enjoyed her new chapter of life with the town's vibe. She had just gotten engaged to her boyfriend, who had a son and a daughter. Up until then, she had lived most of her life in Hardinsburg, Kentucky. One fine day, Vicki chose to relocate to Radcliffe, roughly 35 miles east of Hardinsburg. Vicki decided to take a job at a nearby Super 8 motel adjacent to Elizabethtown, to aid her hard-working fiancé and offer a second income for their new house. Radcliffe is a tiny village in Kentucky's Hardin County that is most known for being the birthplace of Abraham Lincoln. Vicki would wind up as a night auditor at the Super 8, where she would monitor the Super 8 for the motel's managers and operate the front desk overnight. Now, while this may seem daunting to some of us, Vicki saw it as an opportunity to earn some good money. February 20th, 1987 seemed to be a typical day for Vicki. She was getting ready for another overnight shift at the Super 8. Another calm night with the occupancy rate hovering at around 50%. The motel manager stayed with Vicki until around 11 p.m., after which he left the motel in Vicki's care until the morning. Snow began to fall in the region in the early morning hours, blanketing everything in a thin layer of frost. Unfortunately, nobody could anticipate that the frozen flakes were covering somebody. Vicki Heath was discovered dead outdoors behind the motel's garbage, her corpse in a muddy and The lieutenant arrived at the location a short time later. The motel's guest called them. The guest said that the lobby was messy and that the auditor went missing suddenly. Then, only minutes before daylight, they discovered Vicki Heath's body lying on her back in dead, muddy grass created by the recently melted snow. Vicki was still dressed in her sweater and plaid skirt from the previous evening. Still, it was knotted and ripped, indicating a battle with an assailant who had likely fought Vicki in the motel lobby before her outside behind the motel's trash. The kit proved that she was assaulted and shot to death, but the murderer was unknown. Investigators then discovered traces of a massive battle in the motel lobby, and it was found that Vicki had been and shot in the head with a .38 caliber revolver. That day turned out to be Vicki's family's worst nightmare, since there were no proper pieces of evidence and neither were there any eyewitnesses. The investigators were trying to stop the case from going cold, but they didn't know that they would get another case file. Just a couple of days later, 2 ladies were discovered murdered around 50 miles apart on March 3, 1989. Within a few hours, police found that a single person had perpetrated both crimes. A passing vehicle discovered Mary Peggy Gill a night auditor working at the Days Inn Hotel in Merrillville, Indiana. She was found dead in the parking lot. She was just 24 years old. Peggy had spent that entire day with her father Terry since it was his birthday, but the old man would not have expected this kind of birthday gift from his daughter. Terry was lost when he heard that his daughter was and murdered on his birthday. He was furious, but unfortunately, his rage couldn't help him find the murderer. Her entire family was devastated. Well, she wasn't the only one. Jeanne Gilbert, a 34-year-old mother of two who worked part-time as an auditor at the Remington Days Inn, was fatally shot with the same .22 caliber revolver and left on the roadside. The assailant had robbed her as well. The victims were both murdered on March 3, 1989. Jeanne Marie Gilbert's father, Andrew, and mother, Patricia, raised her in Jasper County, Indiana, primarily in Rensselaer, a tiny town where she spent most of her childhood. Jeanne was married at a young age, but she and her husband divorced a few years later when their two children, Kimberly and Scott, were in their teenage years.
We'll never know what the killer was thinking. We'll never learn any of the whys of his actions. And that's just where we sit today. I'd like to believe that whatever each of us defines as justice, or what each of us might define as closure, that we're all now able to share in the healing process, knowing the long-known attacker has now been brought out of the dark and into the light.
Jeanne and her children moved in with her parents after the divorce, while she took a breath and planned her future moves. Jeanne started working part-time at the Days Inn Hotel in Remington, a nearby town, to augment her income. She was promoted to the position of night auditor, but fate didn't let her family cherish the moment of her promotion. Instead, they were allowed to mourn Jeanne's death. Unidentified by the detectives, the 1989 killings of 24-year-old Peggy Gill and 34-year-old Jeanne Gilbert were merely the tip of the iceberg of the case of this unknown killer. A series of additional crimes across the region, from Kentucky to Minnesota, would subsequently be tied to the same person. Were Vicki's and Jeanne's ex-husbands the suspect? Why would the I-65 serial killer night shift workers? Every question was left unanswered since the investigators could not connect the dots between these three victims. In 1990, a fourth woman was working the night shift at a Days Inn hotel in Columbus, Indiana. Fortunately, she managed to flee the scene. She was the only one to survive the entire incident and became the sole survivor. The bold Jane Doe provided authorities with a composite sketch of a man with greasy gray hair, a lazy green eye, and a beard wearing blue jeans. The sketch was circulated through every platform, but unfortunately, her sketch didn't help the investigators to reach the I-65 serial killer. As a result, and murders continued to occur in Indiana with no clear end in sight. But unfortunately, all of these cases went cold, and the pains of the victims' parents, kids, and spouses went in vain. Losing loved ones is hard, but seeing them in pieces and being unaware of what happened to them is truly. Decades passed. It was a fine morning in Iowa. The landscapes were beautiful, and there was a slight chill in the air. Iowa was known for farming and agriculture until April 5th, 2022. Yeah, in April, Iowa found that its crowning glory was now the ruthless I-65 serial killer in its place. Can you imagine meeting a serial killer at a farmer's market? Trust me, countless Midwestern customers met the I-65 killer and had it as their routine. Can such serial killers lead a routine life without counting their days behind bars? According to the residents of Iowa, our criminal seemed to be a do-gooder, a family person, and a genuine soul born in Louisville. The I-65 serial killer was one of a half-dozen siblings who have since died. He also spent about 30 years as a public safety officer for the Canadian Pacific Railroad until retiring in 2010. The serial killer did organic gardening, sold his organic vegetables at the local farmer's market, traveled, read, and picked winning thoroughbred horses. Many of the serial killer's friends admired the individual's forthright demeanor and eagerness to assist everyone. How could such a man destroy women's lives and lead such a normal family life? And how could fate be so kind as to such an awful man? Well, people around the Days Inn serial killer might have been fooled by him, but the technology was not. To identify a criminal offender's genetic ancestors and locate the offender within the family tree, Indiana State Police adopted a procedure that included submitting crime scene DNA profiles to one or more genetic genealogy databases. The suspect was then matched with a close family member through the design. The chance of the I-65 serial killer being the perpetrator of the assaults was assessed to be more than 99.99% using this match.
It was 99.9999% positive.
The lady who was set in Minnesota in 1991 also provided authorities with a similar description. And that's how it was finally cracked. Meet the I-65 and Days Inn serial killer, Harry Edward Greenwell. When Indiana State Police reached him, the real twist happened. So let us look into the genuine profile he made for himself before knowing what happened. While looking into Greenwell's profile, he was married to Julie Jenkins. She had 3 adult children of her own. Greenwell had his son and daughter. He was arrested twice in Iowa in 1998, once for violating a restraining order and the second for felony possession. That November, his lawsuit was dismissed. It's unknown how Greenwell got away with it for the rest of his life or whether there are any more victims. These cases did not lie unresolved for all these years due to a lack of investigative activity. Investigators were constantly following up on leads across the country and doing everything they could to find the perpetrators. They were able to identify this individual, though, thanks to technology advancements and solid collaborative connections. But the real twist lies here. Our victims list has not ended here. According to investigators, Greenwell is also suspected of being involved in several unsolved crimes. Sergeant Glenn Fifield of the Indiana State Police says that the investigation is still ongoing. Before Indiana State Police reached him, however, he was sent to hell. Yep. Unfortunately, the monster that did this is no longer alive. Our I-65 serial killer died at the age of 68 in Iowa battling cancer. His friends said that his spirit would live on via the beautiful things he did in life. However, they didn't know that they had to change their perception of Greenwell after April 5th, 2022, hearing that he several women and murdered them at motels along the Interstate 65 corridor in Kentucky and Indiana. Greenwell was married to Ms. Jenkins for over 20 years before his death in 2013. She explained, "I keep remembering our time together and how nice and kind he was. He had a temper, but that's not uncommon. I don't believe you kill strangers because you're angry with them. I'm not sure what to make of any of it, except that I feel terrible for the families who have had to deal with this for so long, and I know that there's nothing I can do about it." DNA advancements today hold the answers to this decades-long mystery, with genetic genealogy providing interesting avenues for law enforcement. So today, I believe we should concentrate on the victims. We owe them a debt of gratitude that we will never be able to repay. What do you guys think about the untold story of the I-65 serial killer? Let us know in the comment section, and don't forget to like our videos. If you are a newbie to our channel, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this. And until next time.